Folks, I'd like to welcome Brian Overstreet to Creating New Healthcare. Brian is a serial entrepreneur who, over the past couple of decades, has launched a number of successful data and analytics SaaS companies in healthcare. He is now the co-founder, president, and CEO of Arbital Health. That's Arbitel, Arbital Health. It's a tech company that greatly enables payers and providers with value-based contracting. This is something when I first heard about it and came across it, I was super excited. This is really something I believe is needed. The company's young, launched at the end of 2023, really in January of 2024, already had two rounds of funding totaling $46 million investment. Super excited for you, Brian. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ev. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, what is the big problem that Arbital Health is solving for, and how do you think this is at a high level going to transform healthcare delivery?
Yeah, it's a great question. To frame it up, my co-founder Travis and I both come, as you said, from a background with data and analytics and healthcare. And we started talking a couple years ago about what would ultimately become Arbital Health. The approach was looking for big gaps in the market that were underserved with data and analytics. And we very quickly settled into value-based care with a general question around why, if value-based care has now been around for 20 plus years, has it not really worked the way that everybody would have hoped and expected? I think everybody recognizes that the traditional fee-for-service programs for healthcare are slowly or quickly driving us all off of an economic cliff in this country. And I think as a concept, tying patient outcomes and financial incentives is the right solution. And that's what value-based care is meant to do. But it just hasn't worked at the scale or the speed that is necessary. And from our perspective, the answer to that question was that there is a missing infrastructure layer to the programs where we needed to be able to pull together the payers, the providers, the enablers, give them a shared source of truth, a shared source of data, and then all the tooling to help understand how to construct these contracts, how to measure the performance of the contracts in real time, how to understand how to make corrections with patients or providers as the contracts were in flight, and how to avoid the natural conflict that seems to exist at the end of a contract cycle and becomes the main blocker for this becoming a repeatable process. So it's a very complex problem set. It's a very big problem. And from our perspective, it came down to solving in two different categories. The first was, how do we unlock the source of truth? How do we get the data? How do we clean up those claim data and MMR data and engagement data that feeds into these contracts? How do we get access to the data? How do we clean it all up? And then the second part of it was, how do we provide the analytics layer to sit on top of a clean data set to really understand what is happening in real time with these contracts and how to be able to properly forecast and benchmark the financial outcomes so that all the parties have greater transparency into the underlying workflow that's going on. The world that Travis and I come from is that data part of it. And we knew it was going to be complex, but we felt convinced that we would be able to unlock that. But to be able to unlock the analytics layer, we knew that we were going to need to have depth in the actuarial sciences. So one of the things we did very early on that was pretty unique was we acquired an actuarial services company. And with that came expertise and clients and revenue, but most importantly was the IP of how to design this analytics layer for what became the Arbital Health technology platform. And so, as you mentioned, we formed the company at the end of 2023. We announced the acquisition of this company right at the beginning of January 2024, which is when we did our first round of financing. And we've been off and running ever since. And it is a big, big problem. But I think the success and the growth that we've had to date demonstrate just how important the work is that we're doing and how much it's already starting to resonate. And it's been super exciting.
I, I just have to say it is exciting. It is hugely transformational. I know it doesn't sound it. It sounds, again, data, analytics,
Yeah.
actuarial sounds pretty dry, but it really is the core issue in my experience with value-based contracts. It's exactly as you say. Unlocking the data itself is huge. The claims, measuring them, the transparency around them, And then to your point, the actuarial analytics around that, this makes or breaks value-based contracting. If you can't, I mean, value-based, right, to me, and the word gets has been used now for so long, as you point out, it's almost become meaningless. But the point is, it's actually outcomes-based contracting. That's what
Cor-
it's about.
Correct.
And you have to, if you want it to be outcomes-based contracting, you have to measure it. You have to have the science behind it. And you're really unlocking the key to value-based contracting. And you're so right. We've had this for decades, and it hasn't gone anywhere. It's still such a small percentage
Yeah.
of the market is value-based. What, so how does it, if you could spend a couple of minutes, how does it actually work? How would a provider or payer, I don't know who your clients are, like who would access you, and how would that actually unfold?
Yeah. So to date, most of our clients are on the provider side, but the
Hmm.
payers are starting to come on board now quickly as well. And for the providers, it's a fairly basic use case. You know, they are the ones who are taking on the risk in a value-based care arrangement. They typically don't have the same access to the data, and they certainly don't have the internal capabilities to ingest and understand the flow of the data and how their contracts are performing in real time. So for them, it's sort of like their house is on fire and we're the ones selling them buckets of water. We're able to open up the windows of transparency into you have 4 or 5 different payer contracts in flight right now. You think you're working at a surplus, but in fact, you're working at a deficit. And we can bring forward in time that reality to show you, okay, these contracts are underperforming. Here's why they're underperforming.
Hmm.
Here's a couple of target areas that you can go out and work on to improve before you get to the final reconciliation. Because ultimately, that's what's historically happened is the providers have taken on risk. They go into a sort of an opaque, dark period where they're doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. They come to the end of the contract reconciliation expecting to get a check from the payer
Hmm.
and realize, in fact, they have to write a check back to the payer. And that is a real blocker for how we can build a scalable, sustainable system.
Can you give an example of, like, for instance, when you say providers, are you talking about provider practices, multi-specialty practices, hospital systems? What provider? And do you have an example of a story of how you shared information with the provider that showed them, oh, you have to do something differently in order to achieve savings?
Yeah, when I talk about providers, I'm talking about a fairly wide group. It's really any sort of risk-bearing entity, and we work with all of the above that you just listed out. You know, from sort of the digital point solutions all the way up to the large specialty practice groups. You know, one of the clients that we've announced publicly is Harmony Cares, which is a big at-home care provider based throughout the U.S. They've used our platform now for about a year to ingest data across all of their different payer groups to help understand how those contracts are performing, how the different provider groups within their networks are performing or underperforming, all the way down to the de-identified patient level to be able to see, okay,
Mhm.
this is what's throwing things into disarray. Now, we don't go as so far as to tell them, here are the steps you should be taking clinically, but
Yeah.
if we can help identify where the hotspots are within their networks, that really helps to open their eyes to what changes they can potentially make. But again, our focus is really just on the transparency element of this. Can we provide them with the data? Can we provide them with the actuarial tooling to help understand how their contracts are performing in flight? We really think of this almost like a time machine. Instead of waiting 3 years to see how you're performing,
Yes.
if I can show you every month how your contract is performing, that really changes the dynamic of how you're going to run your business and how you're going to take action, you know, all the way from the board level to the boots on the ground to make
Yeah.
change.
Oh my God. It is exactly. I mean, that's been my experience is you put the contract together, you start working, a year or two later, you get the data, and here's how we did. It's a very ballistic sort of, you just fire in the dark and hope sometime in the future that you've done right. Then you course correct after a year or two, but then it's very, very slow.
Right.
So how often are you providing, the providers the data and feedback so that they can course correct? Is it monthly, as you said? Is it more frequent than that if I wanted to look at it?
Yeah, our default right now is monthly, which, doesn't sound that frequent, but in the context of like you just said, where
Oh,
they're used
it's
to seeing it like 2 years later,
oh yeah.
it's life-changing. I would like to believe in time, especially as we work with more and more payers directly, that we can get better access, faster access to the data. We're building the tooling to be able to ingest and clean data very rapidly. So it's just a function of how do we unlock access to those data. And if we can do that at a faster clip, we'll be able to turn the results even quicker. But right now, we're able to provide all of our clients with monthly updates across all their payer contracts in all their geographic markets,
Mhm.
and it's game changing for them.
And so, can you talked about hotspots? And so, if I'm a provider and I'm getting a report from you monthly, is like what would be an example of something that I might look at to say, oh, we're not doing as well as we thought, or we're doing better than we thought. Let's learn from this, or let's make a change from this.
Yeah, so the way our platform is designed is sort of a top-down look. So we can have sort of an executive dashboard that will show every contract, how it's performing. Is it working in a surplus or deficit right now, or relative real time on a monthly basis?
Wow.
And then from there, the different clinical leaders, the different market presidents, whoever it is, can
Mm.
start to drill into the data to understand, okay, I was expecting that we'd be running at a $5 million surplus, where in fact we're running at a $3 million deficit. Let's start to understand why that is. Is it tied to how we're forecasting IBNRs? Is it tied to the fact that we randomly had 10 patients who got admitted at the ER for some procedure that we didn't forecast for? Let's understand, do we have a particular physician who's writing coding something differently than we would have expected? Those are all things that the platform can
Wow.
elevate to the surface. And
Mhm.
then, as I said, our clients can start to take the action necessary to make correction before they're at the end of the cycle when it's way too late to actually course correct.
But do you have any numbers in terms of how you've benefited your provider clients?
We do. We're actually going to be putting out towards the end of this year a number of case studies. So I'm gonna punt on the answer a little
Okay.
bit until I have verifiable data. One of the things about working with 25 actuaries is I've learned very quickly you don't just make up numbers on the fly. You got to have verifiable information. So I'm gonna punt.
That's pretty funny. I'm visualizing 25 actuaries. My mind could handle one or two, but 25 is pretty impressive. If a provider group or a payer wants to find out more about you or access you, what's the
Yeah.
best way to do that?
Easiest way is just to come to the website. It's arbitalhealth.com, ARBITAL health.com,
Mhm.
and you'll be able to put in a form. You can send an email directly to me, Brian, Brian, at Arbital Health, or info@arbitalhealth.com. And yeah, and as I mentioned, we are starting to work more and more with payers. It's interesting that we
Mhm.
didn't anticipate the interest on their side as quickly as it's come to us. But they clearly are also looking at this market and getting frustrated by the fact that their value-based contracts are not performing up to the standards that they would hope. And they're struggling a lot to understand, how do they manage the contract process? How do they manage all the different provider vendors? How do they identify
Mhm.
which provider groups are outperforming and underperforming? And those are all things that we're starting to help our payer clients better understand, with the goal again that we're moving towards this infrastructure piece that serves both ends of the marketplace to provide them with access to transparent, fair data and analytics.
Brian, again, super exciting. Such a much needed solution to value-based contracting in our country, and I'm excited to see you grow and help more providers and payers. So, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.